My name is Rachel Palmer. I'm 37, and just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd been anticipating for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years. But as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to take a breather, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. My mother. She was at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, looking every bit the part of the wealthy socialite she'd always been. For a moment, I thought maybe she wouldn't recognize me, but then her eyes flicked up to the mirror and landed on my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice cool and detached, like we'd just bumped into each other at a country club instead of a bathroom after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. "I could say the same," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved with organizations that support education. And you?" "I'm being honored tonight," I said, meeting her gaze. "For my work and research." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words brought me back to the day I walked out of that house for the last time. I was 19, and the years leading up to that moment hadn't been easy. In high school, I struggled with depression, but in my family, that wasn't something you admitted. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had said once, her voice dripping with irritation when I tried to open up to her. "You have everything, more than most kids your age. You're just making excuses." The truth was, I'd been drowning. The pressure to be perfect, to live up to the Palmer name, was suffocating. I tried to keep up, but my grades started slipping during my junior year, and by senior year, I was barely holding on. My parents didn't see a kid who needed help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. "This family has standards," he had said that night, pacing the living room while I stood there clutching my acceptance letter. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine. But you'll do it on your own." I had been kicked out of the house. I remember the weight of that duffel bag as I left the house that night. It wasn't just filled with clothes. It held the reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even come to the door to say goodbye. My mother stayed seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I didn't exist. My father had disappeared into his study after delivering his ultimatum. I felt invisible, discarded, like I'd never been a part of their world to begin with. For the first few weeks, I stayed with a friend, sleeping on her pull-out couch while I tried to figure out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it felt like the only thing I could control. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent when I finally scraped together enough to move into a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, work, and the overwhelming sense of failure that clung to me like a second skin. But something about being on my own, away from their constant judgment, gave me a flicker of hope. For the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. My first year at community college was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts at the diner. I'd decided to study chemistry, partly because I genuinely enjoyed it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel in something challenging. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre at best, and I felt like I was starting from behind compared to my classmates. But for the first time in years, I wasn't under the crushing weight of their expectations. I could just focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I'd spent weeks preparing, going over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I was terrified to look. But there it was, a 92%. I nearly cried, right there in the middle of the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. It felt like the first small step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I had learned how to work for what I wanted, and the more I gave, the more I saw myself grow. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. I transferred to a 4-year university, and while I still faced obstacles, I had learned how to push through them. The shy, insecure girl who barely got by in high school had become someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, once a challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore. I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I worked part-time, still, but I also started interning at local research labs, gaining experience that eventually led me to an opportunity I never imagined, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit focused on advancing science education. It wasn't just a job. It was my way of giving back, of creating a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a moment of triumph, but when it came time to celebrate, I realized something. My parents hadn't even called. Not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans. Nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, threw extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs. But for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I graduated with honors, after I'd worked my ass off to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge the hard work I'd put in. But they didn't. It was as if I never mattered to them, and that realization hit harder than I cared to admit. The only family member who bothered to show up at my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia. She was my mother's younger sister, the black sheep of the family. Lydia had never cared much for my parents' rigid standards, and while they shunned her for being too eccentric, she was always kind to me. She was the one person who would call on my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, I felt a lump form in my throat. She waved at me excitedly from the back, and after the ceremony, I found her in the parking lot, waiting with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It was a small comfort, but it was something. It wasn't the cold silence I'd gotten from my parents. Aunt Lydia was the one who reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection, that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path they wanted for me. She cared that I had made it on my own, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, I was wrapping up a research project at the university when one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist, the kind who had a passion for the periodic table like it was a work of art. He'd noticed my work ethic, my persistence despite everything I'd been through. "Rachel," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first I thought it was a joke. Oxford? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. He told me that this wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make real contributions to the field, and that I deserved the opportunity. "Don't let fear hold you back, Rachel," he said. "You've proven yourself. Now it's time to take that next step." I applied, hesitantly at first, not fully believing it could happen. The application process was rigorous, and I wasn't sure I'd make the cut. But then, weeks later, I received an email. We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University. I moved to England without telling anyone. Not my parents, not any of my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. I called her a few days before I left, and she was the one who encouraged me to go. You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back, she said. Do this for yourself, Rachel. She understood why I needed to disappear, why I needed to escape the shadows of my past and carve out a new future without anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked Lydia not to tell anyone else where I'd gone. I didn't want them to try and find me, didn't want the weight of their judgment pulling me back. So, I left, boarding a plane to Oxford, with nothing but a backpack, and the faint hope that this could be my chance to finally become the person I always dreamed of being. I settled into a small flat in Oxford and threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were tough, the language, the culture, the isolation. But the more I immersed myself in my research, the more I felt at home. I was working on projects that mattered, things that could make a real impact on the world. The chemistry I studied was no longer just about passing exams or proving myself to my parents. It was about changing the future. As the years passed, I completed my master's degree, and then, driven by the momentum of my research, I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and there was no turning back. After several years of sleepless nights and endless lab experiments, I earned my PhD, becoming a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. After finishing my PhD, the next step seemed almost too surreal to grasp. I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. It felt like a dream I never dared to chase, not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I never imagined I would be given the chance. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet, the recognition still felt like it was happening to someone else. At Cambridge, I was able to teach and mentor the next generation of students, something I hadn't expected to find so fulfilling. The freedom to shape minds, to pass on the knowledge and passion I'd gained, was beyond anything I could have imagined back when I was struggling through community college. I had gone from being the girl who didn't belong to someone who could stand at the front of a classroom and be taken seriously. But there was still a piece of me that was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, if anyone cared enough to find out. I hadn't heard from my parents since I left. No calls, no letters, no attempts to reach out. I wondered if they even thought about me. As my mother turned back to the mirror, adjusting her lipstick, I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Her words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," echoed in my head, and I couldn't help but wonder if she really believed it. I thought about all those years I spent trying to meet their expectations, all the ways they told me I wasn't good enough. The community college rejection, the years of silence, and the way they acted like I didn't exist once I walked out of their house. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there in that bathroom, the bitterness still stung. I had worked so hard to get to this point, leaving everything behind, moving to England, finishing my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge. And yet, there she was, standing in front of me, acting like my entire journey had been some kind of afterthought. I had gone from being the failure they cast aside to someone who could now speak at international conferences, lead research, and mentor young minds. And for what? To stand here and have her offer me nothing more than a cold acknowledgement? As she left the bathroom, I watched her glide out of the door, back to the people she was comfortable with. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who'd erased every trace of them from my life. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built a life on my own terms, and even though they would never understand, that was enough. The gala ceremony began shortly after my mother disappeared into the crowd. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of that encounter. The clinking of glasses, the hum of polite conversation. It all felt distant now. It was time to take my place, to step into the role I had fought so hard to claim. The stage was set, the lights shining down on the sea of well-dressed guests, and the moment I had been anticipating for months was finally here. I made my way to the front, where they called my name, the words echoing through the room. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening, but it felt strangely hollow, like I was listening to someone else's life unfold. I took the stage, trying to maintain a calm exterior, but inside, all I could think about was the fact that I was standing in front of an audience of people who knew nothing of the path I had taken to get here. No idea what it had cost me to get this far. The spotlight hit me, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. This wasn't just a recognition of my work in chemistry. This was my way of showing the world that I was more than the person my parents had tried to make me believe I was. This was the moment where I stood on my own 2 feet, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I stood there, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the moment, the host's voice rang out, drawing everyone's attention. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement. In recognition of the groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry that will be honored tonight, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a grant of $2 million to the recipient of this award. The room went quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me. My heart raced. This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the continued efforts of the recipient's research and further their impact on the world of education. I blinked, momentarily stunned. $2 million. The number hung in the air, surreal and overwhelming. But the announcement wasn't directly for me. It was for the recipient of the award, someone whose name hadn't been revealed yet. I was still processing everything when I heard the host's voice continue. This grant, though anonymous, will be bestowed upon the person tonight who has demonstrated exceptional dedication to their work in advancing chemistry and education. For a moment, I didn't know what to think. The enormity of the sum, the way it would change someone's life, was astounding. But there was something else in the air, something I couldn't shake. The realization that the donor didn't know it would be me. They didn't know I was the one being honored tonight. As the announcement echoed through the room, my eyes wandered across the crowd, trying to catch a glimpse of the people around me. But then, something caught my attention. A subtle shift in the crowd. Near the back, just beside the exit, I saw him. My father. He stood up abruptly, his face twisted in disgust. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, before he turned sharply and began to make his way toward the door. His movements were swift and deliberate, as if he couldn't get out of that room fast enough. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man who had rejected me all those years ago, the one who had kicked me out of his house, was leaving as soon as he heard the news of the grant. He didn't even stay to see who was being recognized for the award. My chest tightened as a mix of emotions washed over me: anger, disbelief, and something darker, more bitter. This was the moment I had been waiting for. A moment where everything I had worked for was finally being acknowledged, and he couldn't even bring himself to stay in the room to witness it. He couldn't stomach the fact that the daughter he had written off was now standing at the front of the room, receiving everything he had always expected from someone else. As my father made his way toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The strange weight of his sudden departure settled over me, but before I could process it, the announcer's voice sliced through the room again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host continued, "we are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. The $2 million grant which will be awarded to the recipient of this honor, has been made possible through the contributions of Mosaic Fertilizers, a company led by one of the most influential figures in the fertilizer industry. Mosaic Fertilizers. My father's company. I froze. The donor, the one whose generosity had made this award possible, was my father's company. My chest tightened as the truth hit me. The man who had spent years treating me like an embarrassment, the one who had walked out of the room when he learned of my success, was the one funding this recognition. The irony stung deeply. The same man who rejected my path, who disowned me for pursuing a life that didn't fit into his perfect image, had unknowingly backed the very award that would be the crowning achievement of my career. It was almost too much to process, too much to bear in that moment. I stood there stunned as the announcer's words continued to echo in my ears. The applause around me felt distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. The weight of the grant, of everything that had just been revealed, hung heavily on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment I couldn't process any of it. "Thank you," I managed to say into the microphone, my voice shaky but steady enough. The words felt hollow, too small for what I was feeling, but I didn't have time to think about it. I had to get out of that room. I couldn't stand there another second, basking in the recognition that felt so empty. I turned abruptly, walked off the stage, and without another glance at the audience, I bolted for the back door. My steps quickened as I made my way through the hallway, heart racing, only one thought running through my mind. My father. I knew he'd left the room. I saw him walk out, his face a mixture of disgust and something else I couldn't quite read. But he couldn't just leave, not like this, not when everything had come full circle. I couldn't let it end like this, with him walking out on the one moment that proved everything he had tried to dismiss about me. I pushed through the door leading outside, scanning the area, my breath coming in quick bursts. There he was, standing by his car, his back to me. My feet moved on their own, and before I could stop myself, I was running. "Dad!" I called out, my voice almost cracking as I rushed after him. He didn't look back at first, his shoulders stiff, but when he finally turned around, I saw the bitter expression on his face. He had that same look I remembered from all those years ago, like everything was an insult to him. "What is it now, Rachel?" he asked sharply, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think I'm going to congratulate you?" I stopped just a few feet away, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew what this was about. He had no idea who the recipient of the grant was until they called my name. Until that moment, he thought he was just funding some good cause, sending money to the foundation, believing it was going to some worthy academic or researcher he could proudly point to. He didn't know it would be me standing there on that stage. He sneered, his lips curling into a bitter smile. I don't know whether to be disgusted or impressed, but here you are, taking my money. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, right? I could see the resentment in his eyes. The grant, $2 million, had come from Mosaic Fertilizers, his company. But once the money was donated to the foundation, it was entirely out of his control. They had chosen who would receive it, and they chose me. The irony hit me like a wave. "I didn't ask for this," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rush of emotions. "I never asked for your money or your approval. I earned this on my own, just like everything else." His eyes darkened and he shook his head. "It doesn't change anything. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house all those years ago. No grant or award is going to change that." I felt a rush of anger, but I pushed it down. It doesn't matter what you think anymore. I've made my own life. And if that money came from you, it doesn't mean anything to me. I turned my back on him without saying another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to argue with him anymore. He wouldn't understand, and truthfully, I didn't need his approval. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to him. And for what? To be here, at this moment, with everything I had worked for, only for him to stand there bitter and resentful of my success? It wasn't worth my time. The next day, I made a decision. I had spent the night thinking about what the $2 million grant meant. At first, it had felt like a victory, a vindication, but by morning, that feeling had faded. It wasn't my victory. It was just another reminder of everything I had escaped. The money, tied to his company, was never going to erase the years of pain and rejection. It wasn't going to heal the part of me that he had broken when he kicked me out of the house all those years ago. So, I donated the entire sum, every last cent of it. I didn't want it. Not from him, not with the strings that came attached to it. Instead, I directed it toward funding scholarships for underprivileged students who had been overlooked, underestimated, and written off. I wanted to give them the chance to build something for themselves, without being crushed under the weight of expectations that didn't belong to them. The money that had once been tied to rejection and bitterness was now part of something greater, something that would outlast the sting of my father's judgment. I felt a quiet satisfaction as I pressed the donation button. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need his money, his approval, or his recognition. I had built my own legacy, one that would live on far beyond the walls of that gala.
You're choosing a farmer over your own family? My father's voice boomed across his mahogany-filled executive office. This is insanity, Sarah. You've lost your mind. He slammed his fist on the desk, making his CEO of the Year award rattle. My mother sat in her designer suit, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while my younger sister Madison stared at me like I'd grown a second head. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 35, I'd finally found the courage to follow my heart, even if it meant walking away from my family's wealth and status. After 15 years of being the perfect corporate daughter, Stanford Business School, VP position at Mitchell Enterprises, the whole 9 yards, I was choosing love over luxury. And boy, did that throw my family into chaos. He's not just a farmer, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jack runs one of the most successful organic farms in the valley. He's educated, hardworking. He's nobody, my dad cut me off. While you were learning to run a billion-dollar company, he was probably learning to milk cows. Is that what you want? To throw away everything we've built for you to become a farmer's wife? The irony is, I met Jack Wilson at one of my dad's own charity galas. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was filling in for another local business owner. But there he was, in a slightly outdated suit, talking passionately about sustainable agriculture and his vision for the future. While other men at these events usually tried to impress me with their stock portfolios or vacation homes, Jack spoke about soil conservation and helping small farmers thrive. I've already made up my mind, I told them, standing up straighter. I'm moving in with Jack next week. The wedding's in 3 months, and I hope you'll be there. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice cold, don't expect to keep your position here, or your trust fund, or anything else from this family. I looked around the office one last time, the family photos on the wall, all perfectly staged, of course, the views of downtown Seattle, the life I was supposed to want. Then I placed my company ID and credit cards on his desk. Goodbye, Dad. Mom. Madison. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking on the marble floors for the last time. Behind me, I could hear my mom's quiet sobs and Madison's whispered, "She's lost it completely." When I tell people I gave up a 7-figure salary and a corner office to live on a farm, they usually think I had some sort of mental breakdown. The reality? Living in Jack's farmhouse these past 6 months has brought me more peace than 20 years in corporate America ever did. Sure, the transition wasn't easy. Trading my Tesla for a pickup truck, my Louboutins for work boots, my penthouse for a century-old farmhouse. It was a shock to the system. The first time I had to help deliver a calf at 3 a.m., I almost called my driver out of habit before remembering this was my life now. But there was something real about it all, something my previous life had lacked. My family's reaction was exactly what you'd expect. My mom sent daily texts about good matches from her country club circle. Madison kept forwarding job listings from competing companies. My dad maintained radio silence, though his secretary called monthly to remind me what I was giving up. The trust fund, the connections, the real life they thought I deserved. What they didn't understand was that Jack wasn't some simple farmer. Yes, he worked the land, but he also had degrees in agricultural science and business management. His organic farming operation supplied high-end restaurants across 3 states. He'd turned his grandfather's struggling farm into a model of sustainable agriculture. But to my family, anyone who didn't make their money in a boardroom was beneath them. The wedding invitations went out last week. My mom returned hers with a note saying she couldn't bear to watch my downfall. Madison at least called to decline, blaming a business trip that I knew she'd scheduled specifically for that date. My dad's invitation came back unopened. I was helping Jack review some property documents when something caught my eye. The farm's boundaries extended far beyond what I'd originally thought, including a pristine piece of lakefront property. The same property my dad had been trying to acquire for his new resort development. "Oh yeah," Jack said casually. "Your father's company has been trying to buy that land for months. They've offered way above market value, but my grandfather promised to keep it agricultural. It's some of the best soil in the valley." I sat there stunned as the implications sank in. My dad's big resort project, the one he'd been bragging about at every board meeting, couldn't happen without this land. And it belonged to the man he'd dismissed as just a farmer. I didn't tell Jack about my dad's project right away. I needed time to process this bizarre twist of fate. The next morning, while collecting eggs from the chicken coop, something that still amazed my manicured hands, I got the call I'd been expecting. "Sarah, darling!" My mom's voice dripped with sudden sweetness. "We've been thinking about your situation. Perhaps we were too hasty. Why don't you and Jack come to dinner on Sunday?" I nearly dropped my basket. After 6 months of cold shoulders and disapproving messages, this sudden change of heart was suspicious. Then my dad came on the line. "Princess, your mother's right. We should get to know this young man of yours. Maybe we can find a way to make this work. After all, we're family." Standing there in my muddy boots, surrounded by clucking chickens, I finally understood. They must have discovered Jack owned the land. This wasn't about accepting my choices. It was about securing their business interests. The thought made my stomach turn. That evening, I watched Jack working in his office, poring over crop rotation plans. He was completely unaware that he held the key to a multi-million-dollar development deal. When he noticed me staring, he just smiled and asked if I wanted to help him plan next season's organic vegetable program. "My parents invited us to dinner," I said carefully. "They want to make amends." Jack looked up, surprised. "Really? What changed their minds?" I took a deep breath. "I think I know. And we need to talk about something important." Before I could continue, his phone rang. It was his lawyer calling about another offer from Mitchell Enterprises, this time double the previous amount. Jack politely declined, as he had every other offer. When he hung up, he noticed my face. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "That resort they want to build? It's my father's pet project, the one he's been working on for years. Without this land, it can't happen." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Is that why they suddenly want to meet me? To negotiate?" I nodded, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry. I should have realized sooner." To my surprise, Jack started laughing. "Your father's been sending increasingly aggressive offers for months, never once mentioning he was your dad. I guess he didn't want to admit his daughter was marrying the stubborn farmer who kept turning him down." Sunday dinner at the Mitchell Mansion was exactly the power play I expected. My mom had arranged everything perfectly. Her best china, fresh flowers from her greenhouse, and even my favorite childhood dessert. My dad was wearing his closing a deal smile, the same one he used on reluctant investors. "Jack, my boy," my dad boomed as we entered, acting like he hadn't spent months calling Jack a gold-digging nobody. "Welcome to our home. Sarah tells us you're quite the entrepreneur yourself." I watched Jack take it all in. The crystal chandeliers, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle. He looked surprisingly comfortable in his pressed jeans and button-down shirt, so different from the suits that usually occupied these rooms. "Nice place you have here, Mr. Mitchell," Jack said politely. "Those are some beautiful heirloom roses in your garden, though you might want to check them for black spot. I noticed some discoloration on the leaves." My mom nearly choked on her wine. Nobody criticized her prize roses, but Jack was right. I'd noticed the same thing on our way in. He might not know about fine art or fancy wines, but he knew about growing things. Throughout dinner, my dad expertly steered the conversation toward business. "You know, Jack, your sustainable farming methods are fascinating. Have you ever considered expanding? With the right investment partner?" "Actually," Jack replied between bites of my mom's roast beef, "we are expanding. Just broke ground on a new greenhouse complex last week. Self-funded, of course." I hid my smile behind my napkin. Jack hadn't mentioned any greenhouse project to me. He was playing my dad at his own game. The tension peaked when my dad finally showed his hand. "About that lakefront parcel," he said casually, swirling his bourbon. "I have some interesting proposals that could benefit us both. Why don't we step into my study to discuss numbers?" "With all due respect, sir," Jack replied, "that land isn't for sale. At any price. It's not about money. It's about keeping a promise and protecting something valuable." My dad's face darkened. "Everything has a price, son. Name it." "Not everything, Mr. Mitchell. Not integrity, not promises, and not your daughter's trust." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face turned that dangerous shade of red I remembered from childhood board meetings gone wrong. My mom's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. "Now listen here," my dad growled, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "You clearly don't understand how things work in the real world. That resort would bring jobs, tourism, development. Are you really going to let your stubborn pride stand in the way of progress?" "Progress?" Jack set down his fork. "You mean like paving over some of the most fertile soil in the valley? Displacing family farms that have been here for generations? That kind of progress?" "They'd be well compensated," my dad snapped. "More money than their farms have made in decades." "Until the money runs out," Jack replied calmly. "Then what?" "They can't eat money, Mr. Mitchell. But they can eat what we grow. That land feeds people, real people, not just rich tourists looking for a weekend getaway." I reached for Jack's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, someone who understood that some things mattered more than money. "Sarah," my mom interjected, her voice honey-sweet but desperate, "surely you can make him understand. Think about your future, darling, your children's future." "I am thinking about the future, Mom, just not the one you imagined for me." My dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "If you walk away now, don't come crawling back when you're tired of playing farmer's wife. There won't be a place for you here anymore." "There hasn't been a real place for me here in years, Dad," I said quietly. "I was just too afraid to admit it. But I'm not afraid anymore." Jack and I stood up together. As we headed for the door, Madison finally spoke up from her silent observation. "You're really choosing dirt and tractors over all of this?" She gestured at the opulent dining room. "No, Madison, I'm choosing love and purpose over empty luxury. Maybe someday you'll understand the difference." The aftermath of that dinner sent shockwaves through Seattle's business community. My dad tried everything, pressuring local banks to deny us loans, spreading rumors about the farm's financial stability, even attempting to sway Jack's restaurant clients to other suppliers. But he underestimated both Jack's reputation and my own business savvy. 2 weeks later, I was sorting through our mail when I found a thick envelope from Mitchell Enterprises' legal department. Inside was a detailed proposal for a compromise. They'd let us keep half the farmland if we sold the lakefront portion. The offer was accompanied by a personal note from my dad. "Be reasonable, princess. Everyone wins this way." I was about to toss it in the recycling when Jack came in from the fields. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his tablet. On the screen was an email from one of the state's largest organic food distributors. They wanted to partner with us, exclusively. Our sustainable farming methods and premium produce had caught their attention. The contract would triple our business overnight. "This is what I was working on instead of Dad's resort," Jack smiled. "We don't need their kind of progress. We're making our own." That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over our fields, I drafted a response to my dad's offer. I attached photos of our latest soil analysis reports, showing the exceptional quality of the lakefront property's earth. I included testimonials from local families who depended on our farming co-op program. Finally, I added projected revenue figures for our new distribution contract. "Keep your resort, Dad," I wrote. "We're building something more important." The next day, we received an unexpected visitor. Madison pulled up in her Mercedes, looking comically out of place on our dirt driveway. She stood awkwardly in her designer heels, taking in the scene, me in my work clothes, helping Jack load produce for the farmer's market. "I don't understand any of this," she admitted, "but you look happy, really happy. And that new distribution deal? The board's talking about it. You're actually making waves in the industry, just not the way Dad expected." It was the first crack in the family's united front against us. Madison stayed for dinner, asking genuine questions about the farm, actually listening to our vision for the future. As she was leaving, she paused. Maybe you could show me around the farmer's market sometime?" Life has a funny way of coming full circle. A year after that explosive family dinner, I found myself back in a corporate boardroom, but this time, I was representing our farm at a sustainable agriculture conference. Our success story had caught the attention of the organic farming community, and they wanted me to share how we'd managed to turn a traditional family farm into a model of sustainable profitability. As I prepared for my presentation, I spotted a familiar face in the audience, my dad. He sat in the back row, trying to be inconspicuous in his $1,000 suit among the farmers and agricultural specialists. Our eyes met briefly, but neither of us acknowledged the other. I talked about our journey, about choosing purpose over profit, about building something meaningful. I shared how our distribution partnership had exceeded expectations, how our farming co-op program had helped 5 local families start their own organic operations, how we'd expanded our greenhouse program to supply fresh produce year-round. The questions afterward were mostly technical: soil management strategies, distribution logistics, profit margins. But one young woman asked something different. "Weren't you afraid to leave your corporate career behind?" I couldn't help glancing at my dad as I answered. The scariest decisions often lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Sometimes you have to trust that choosing what's right matters more than choosing what's easy. After the conference, Madison met me for coffee. She'd been visiting the farm regularly, even helping at our weekend farmers market stall. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by casual wear, and she looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Dad's resort project fell through," she told me, stirring her latte. "The investors backed out when they realized the lakefront property wasn't available. But here's the interesting part. My mom's been asking questions about our farming operation. I caught her reading books about organic gardening." I laughed at the image of our mother with her perfect manicure digging in the dirt, but then Madison turned serious. "She misses you, Sarah. Dad too, though he'd never admit it. The house feels empty now. All that success, all that money. It doesn't mean much when your family's broken." "I never wanted to break the family," I said quietly. "I just couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." "I know that now," Madison replied. "And I think they're starting to understand too. Dad even defended your business model at a board meeting last week, called it innovative and forward-thinking." 2 months after the conference, we got a surprising piece of mail, an environmental impact study commissioned by Mitchell Enterprises. It detailed the potential ecological damage their resort project would have caused to the valley's water table and soil quality. At the bottom was a handwritten note from my dad. "You were right about the land. Maybe we need to talk." That weekend, my parents' car pulled up our driveway for the first time. My mom was wearing jeans. I'd never seen her in denim in my life. My dad looked older, more subdued. They stood awkwardly on our porch, taking in the windmill, the solar panels, the fields stretching out to the horizon. "Your mother wants to see your greenhouse," my dad said gruffly, "if that's all right." Jack gave them the full tour, explaining our hydroponic systems and vertical farming techniques. My mom actually seemed interested, asking questions about the herbs she'd been trying to grow in her windowsill garden. My dad remained quiet, but I caught him nodding appreciatively at our computer-controlled irrigation system. Over dinner, featuring everything from our own farm, my dad finally spoke up. "The board is interested in establishing a sustainable agriculture division," he said, pushing food around his plate. "They think there's a growing market for it. We could use some expert consultation." I nearly dropped my fork. Was this my father's version of an olive branch? "We're not selling the land, Dad," I said firmly. "I know," he replied, surprising me. "That's not what I'm suggesting. The company needs to adapt, to think about the future differently. You two seem to know how to do that." Later, as Jack and my dad discussed potential collaboration ideas, my mom pulled me aside. "I didn't understand before," she said softly. "I thought you were throwing your life away. But watching you today, the way you light up talking about this place, how proud you are of what you've built, I've never seen you so alive." The sun was setting over the fields as my parents prepared to leave. My dad stopped by the old oak tree in our front yard, the one Jack's grandfather had planted. "You know," he said, "I spent my whole life building things that reach toward the sky. Maybe I should have paid more attention to what grows from the ground up. These days, our farm has become something none of us expected. We still supply organic produce to restaurants and markets, but we've also started an education program. Every weekend, young entrepreneurs and corporate burnouts visit to learn about sustainable farming. Even Madison quit her VP position at Mitchell Enterprises to help run our training workshops. The biggest surprise? My mom's weekly visits. She started small, helping with the herb garden, but now she manages our entire flower program. Those designer suits are permanently replaced by gardening clothes, and she's never seemed happier. She's even started teaching floral arrangement classes to local kids. My dad's transformation has been more subtle, but just as meaningful. While he hasn't traded his business world for farming, he's helped us expand our reach. Mitchell Enterprises now partners with small farms across the state, proving that profit and sustainability can coexist. Last month, he proudly showed me their new corporate mission statement, "Growing success from the ground up," a phrase that made us both smile. Jack and I still laugh about how it all started, my family's horror at their perfect corporate daughter falling for a farmer. But sometimes the worst moments in life lead you exactly where you need to be. We didn't just save a piece of land. We helped heal a family. At a harvest festival that we hosted at the farm, as I watched my dad teaching my 3-year-old daughter how to pick strawberries, my mom arranging wildflowers with local children, and Madison giving tours of our new training center, I couldn't help but marvel at life's unexpected turns. The land that once threatened to tear our family apart has become the very thing that brought us back together. The resort never happened, but something better grew in its place. Understanding, respect, and a deeper kind of success than any of us had imagined. Jack joined me on the porch, dirty from working in the fields but grinning. "Think you made the right choice?" he asked, wrapping an arm around me. I watched as my dad scooped up our daughter, both of them laughing as they headed toward my mom's flower garden. The setting sun painted the fields golden, and the evening air was sweet with the smell of ripening fruit and fresh herbs. "You know," I said, "I don't think I chose between my family and the farm after all. I just helped them see there was room for both. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. I may have walked away from one version of success, but I walked into something far more precious. A life rich with purpose, love, and the kind of wealth you can't measure in dollars.